This is Tom Fox. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Diabetes, the Metabolic Bully. I am thrilled to have with me Dr. Byron Black. First of all, Byron, thank you so much for sitting down for this series. I'm greatly looking forward to it.
I'm glad to be here.
Byron, could you tell us a little bit about your academic and professional background, noting that you have a PhD, and I'm a professor's kid, so I'm always notice folks with PhDs. Tell us a little bit about your academic background.
I started out in '96 at Schreiner University, where I obtained my Bachelor's of Arts in Exercise Science. And in 2016, I decided I won't, we're not live, are we?
We're live.
2006, thank you. I decided I wanted to get my master's. And so I went and got my master's in exercise science. And I thought I was done with my education until 2010, when I stumbled upon this program at the Rocky Mountain University in Provo, Utah, for a PhD in health promotion and wellness. And it fit into my life because it was a hybrid program where I could still work full time and go to school. And so I signed up and completed that in 2020.
Let me go back to your undergraduate degree at Schreiner. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Louisiana.
What brought you to Schreiner?
After I retired from the military, from the Air Force, my parents had moved here to Ingram. And when I retired out, I only had 16 days. I was stationed in England, and I had 16 days to get out of England, basically. And so I came back here, and with the idea that I would look for jobs and move away eventually. But Schreiner, I got the offer to go to Schreiner and took it and just fell in love with the hill country.
What was the highest rank you achieved in the Air Force?
I was a sergeant.
And what was your specialty?
I was a ground radio technician.
And you mentioned being stationed in England. Any other overseas stations?
I did some time in Spain, did some time in Italy, in Germany. Those were very short stints, but England was my main area.
And coming down here to the hill country, I lived here a little over 2 years. I fell in love with it as well, but I did when I was a little boy, and I always said if I could move back out here, I would, and I did. Can you tell us a little bit about your professional career during the time you got your master's and then even your PhD? What were you doing?
In 2004, I started working for the Air Force again, up in Minot, North Dakota, at Minot Air Force Base, and got a chance to move to Dyess Air Force Base in Abilene. And that's where I really started my career, because I was temporary in Minot, but when I got to Dyess, I was permanent full time. And I was the base exercise physiologist. So I helped the airmen with their health and fitness and passing their fitness test. And then that's where I started working on my master's. And then my wife and I, who I met at Dyess and married her there, she was my boss, job security. And we got stationed at Lackland. And so I finished up my master's there and kept working that, and decided that I wanted to get my PhD, and then started that process. But in 2015, I resigned from the Air Force and worked on my PhD full time and dedicated everything to that. And then once I finished my PhD, I decided to open up the medical fitness clinic here.
So let me ask you about your time as a fitness director working with airmen. It strikes me you were a little bit older than a typical airman at that time.
Right.
How did they relate to someone older than themselves, really helping them with fitness? Were they open to it? Is that part of the culture of the Air Force?
Yeah, they were very open to it because, one, a lot of your senior NCOs and senior officers are older, and they are accustomed to taking directions from them. And two, I think the biggest thing was that I was there to help them. They were having health and fitness problems, and they knew that I was there to help them and help them overcome whatever they were having problems with. And so I was very well received by the whole base, every rank and every gender.
So did this fitness take a holistic approach? And I will tell you why, because it sticks with me to this day. When I was in ninth grade, I had a basketball coach who taught health. And the first day he told us and wrote on the board that health is a state of mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being, and not just the absence of disease. And that was 1971, and that's how powerful it was. I can still quote it to this day. And it's the first time I had ever heard that concept. Is that the type of concept you were trying to get across in the Air Force? I know you do that now, but has your thinking evolved in that, or did you move to that early on?
When I was working with the Air Force, I was one component of that. So yes, the base had that holistic approach, but I was the fitness component. Now, if I noticed or heard something from an airman that would kind of put up a flag, then I would say, okay, I'm going to refer you over to mental health or over to one of the base pastors or ministers. So we would all work together to help that airman get whatever they needed.
Let's move up to your time here in Kerrville Lane. You mentioned you founded or started a clinic. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sir. I actually designed the clinic when I was working at Lackland. The building that I worked in had a little fitness center in it. And I was able to work with the providers on base to have them send family members and retirees and active duty over to me so I could work with them specifically. They were the ones that had the high risk problems. They needed the most help. And when I resigned in 2015, I wanted to do that in the private sector or the civilian sector. And once I finished my PhD, I decided it's time to do it. So I started looking around. I was originally going to build my own building, and I still plan to do that someday. But right now, I work with Dwayne Short over at Peak Fitness. He lets me come in and do my training in there. And that's how I got started.
And do you have a sort of typical clientele? Is it older, as in Kirk County, mature folks? Is it younger folks? Is it a mix?
It's a mix. Right now, I have a more mature population because I really want to work with people that have what's called comorbidities. They have diabetes, hypertension, obesity, age-related situations or conditions that require more attention while they're working out. I have to know stuff like what the contraindications are for that condition, for exercise or medications. And so that's the group of people that I work with that need that extra attention.
The work you do, does it move towards this holistic approach that we've alluded to a little bit earlier? Or are you still one component of what you see as that picture?
I'm still just one component. That's pretty much all I am in the wheel of holistic. I don't really know any mental health providers or religious people, spiritual leaders here. So I'm just one little pie.
One little piece of the pie.
Yeah.
Let me turn to diabetes.
Okay.
And diabetes is really, I don't want to say a national disease or illness in the United States, but its impact is as broad as, frankly, any other disease I can think of. Do you have any idea of the national scope of the problem, or maybe Texas or some other numbers you could share with us?
I know in the U.S., the number has increased significantly over the years. Back in 1985, when they first started keeping track of it, we were really low. But now in 2018, we're up to 34.2 million, or at least 10% of the population. And that's 2018. We're in 2023, so I imagine those numbers are probably off the chart by now.
And what are some of just, if I can say it, devastating effects of diabetes? Just having diabetes can be that.
Most people, when they get diabetes, they consider it a death sentence because they saw their parents or their aunt or their brother go through all the symptoms. And initially, diabetes is not harmful. It's painless. But then as it builds up over time, you start to lose your vision. You start to maybe get a toe cut off. The kidneys start to fail. You wind up on dialysis. You're taking more medications. So it's got a lot of wide-ranging problems that come along with it.
You mentioned something I'd like to follow up on, which was the disease that lives inside our head may not be the same disease that exists today. And I say that because my grandfather died from cancer and I saw what that did, but that was in the 60s. Obviously, we've had advances since that time. And you mentioned the death sentence of diabetes. Many of us think we had an older relative go through that. And modern science has evolved in a lot of different ways. Is it still the death sentence, or are there modern strategies that we can employ, literally from someone like yourself all the way up to a medical physician, that we can use now to alleviate some of these effects?
Yes, when a person gets diagnosed with diabetes, and most people don't even know they have diabetes till they go in for their yearly wellness check. The doctor does a blood test on them and it comes back and tells them your A1C is high, you're diabetic or pre-diabetic. And the first attempt at controlling it's usually medications. But there's been study after study has shown that exercise, a proper exercise program, is the best way to control diabetes and lower blood sugar. So that would be my first recommendation is if you get told you have diabetes, find an exercise physiologist like myself, or start walking, or get busy.
Get moving. Is that part of your health practice now, having diabetic patients and clients?
Yes.
Clients? And are you able to really help them or think through, it's not, you mentioned your piece of the pie, but is it really more than that? Because it's not just exercise, it's diet. And as you said, it's a get, move lifestyle.
Right. Yes. I do work with them on their exercise and I do work with them on their nutrition. And I guess I lost the question there.
No, it was just really, are you able to bring a variety of strategies to bear?
Yes, I am. I can work with their exercise, their physical activity, and I can work with their nutrition. I'm not a dietitian, so I don't prescribe diabetic diets, but I can work with them and say, eat more fruit, cut out the cake, stuff like that.
I don't want to say common sense, but maybe close to that.
Very close to it.
Very close to that. Byron, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for our inaugural episode, but I wanted to, before we end, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted any more information on yourself or your practice, find out more about diabetes, what would be the best place or places for them to go?
They can stop by Peak Fitness at 1337 Bandera Highway and ask for me, or they can call me at 210-569-4129 or text, or they can go to my website, www.mfcok.com.
Byron, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me, and I greatly look forward to visiting with you again.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here.